It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I know that our numbers are dwindling as the afternoon develops. I hope I will not let you go to sleep at the final part of this wonderful day. I have to say that I've learned a lot and I found it very inspiring and interesting. It's great to be back in Wales. I have very fond memories, seeing as I was at the University of Aberystwyth, and I earlier on saw a colleague from Ceredigion and Dyfed, which is fantastic. And this year also, I've been very lucky to be welcomed back to Wales because I spoke at the AGM of When Wales, and we've had representatives here from Women Equality Network Wales. And I want to advertise also this fantastic opportunity that's going to occur next year, June the 21st. Please put it in your diaries because When Wales is going to have a fantastic conference. It's something that we should all attend. And then also earlier on this year, I was in this building as well, meeting the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, so the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, who was here invited by Jackie Jones from the Welsh Assembly of Wales, so Women's Assembly of Wales. So it was really fantastic to come back here today. Thank you very much for inviting me. What I'm going to do very briefly is look at some learning that's taken place from around the world, then look at some really good local projects that have helped women's economic empowerment, and then try to finish on some questions and thoughts that we might want to reflect upon, generally speaking, when we're bearing in mind what we've learned. It's been very interesting so far because a lot of the things that have been raised already today are also lessons that you can find in terms of women's economic empowerment. So I'm just going to look very briefly at some of these examples. We're going to look at the European Bank for Reconstruction, which has done a fantastic overview of lessons learned from around the world for women's economic empowerment. Also looking at the World Bank, and then looking at two very specific examples of good practice. One is the Bali Institute for Rural Women, and the other is the Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. Then also look at Goldman Sachs, who've been doing some work for women entrepreneurs around the world. And then lastly, look at Women in Europe for a Common Future, who have done some fantastic work in terms of sustainable development and women's economic empowerment in terms of, and also sustainably developed projects. So if we look at the EBRD's learning, they thought, their research has shown that there are three main areas which enable women to be more economically active. One is provision of access to service, one is provision of access to financial services, and the other is employment opportunities. So we're going to go through each of these. So if we're looking at access to services, what we recognise around the world is if women are spending all their time getting fuel, finding water, etc., they can't actually make it to be economically empowered at all. And also, if we don't have adequate public transport, people can't get to work. So in the UK, for example, we find that rural women often don't have access to the kind of public transport that enables them even to get to work that they can afford. So either they don't have it very well, or it's too expensive, or the timing isn't very good for them, and so on. So we need to know that we need to have access to services in order for women to be able to get to work. So if we want to help women to become economically active, we need to provide access to services. So then we look at access to financial services. So what the ERBD has found is that across the world, women are less able to access financial services than men do. So we have to look and see what can be done. One of the things that can be done is find out what the barriers are. Now, there are some legal barriers. So, for example, around the world, women, in some countries in the world, women can't access credit because they're not allowed to own land. They can't own land. There may be cultural barriers, there may be behavioural barriers. So we need to find out what the barriers are. And then we have to look and see, are there particular products that we can develop in the financial services sector that particularly take into consideration women? So, for example, you might look at microcredit, or you might look at dedicated credit lines for women entrepreneurs. Or you might look at, once you've identified the barriers, you might then say, okay, so what is there in particular that might be beneficial for women? We know that microcredit is very successful for women. We know that, for example, in terms of microcredit, more women access it, but also they're very good at paying back on time. And then in terms of women entrepreneurs, we can help women access training and so forth so that they can make better business plans, they can think about routes to market, what's the benefit to the client and that kind of thing. So then in terms of women in employment, there are various things that we need to improve. One of the things that we find around the world is women don't have equal access to employment and there aren't equal employment opportunities once they're in employment. So one of the things that we can do is we can look at better HR practices so that we can make sure that there is better recruitment, and once people have become employed, then there are equal opportunities within the employment sectors. We need to try to make sure that there are more women candidates going for particular jobs. We can try to help women entrepreneurs so that they themselves can employ more women and give more women opportunities. And then we can also look at those areas which are traditionally male-dominated to try to enable them to employ more women. So, for example, in the UK, what we find is we have occupational segregation. There are something like 10 sectors generally where most of the women in this country are employed. We know, for example, that we don't have women employed very much in construction, engineering, manufacturing, and so on. Okay, so we're going to look now at a particular example. It's called the Bali Institute for Rural Women. It's called Bali because Bali is the name of the post that holds up the village hut. And what they recognise is that women are the ones who hold up the community, and that's why it's called this. It's a fantastic project. It's actually in the state of Madhya Pradesh, and it provides practical projects and it also provides training. It is a brilliant example of best practice. So I really encourage you to go and find the website and look at it. So I can't work out what this thing is that they're talking about, but I think this is part of their hygiene and personal development training that takes place. So these are some of the areas of training that they look at. They look at some kind of vocational training, but they also look at personal development, health and hygiene. They do a lot of work of caring for the environment, which includes solar cooking. They have got a fantastic example of solar cooking. This is a picture of a tree nursery, of a woman learning from a tree nursery. And one of the interesting things about the health and hygiene is that all of their curricula are locally not just accessible, but applicable. So, for example, when they looked at folic acid and the need to have, women having more folic acid in pregnancy, for example, what they found is a lot of the Western curricula was talking about spinach or other ways of getting iron, for example. And they found that a lot of them in their particular area couldn't access that, but they could access some other stuff. So they took the plants that the women normally were using in cooking and used the local ingredients that the women use and included that in their curriculum. So here are some of the projects they look at. They do tree nursery, so they teach the women about how to access the seeds, access the plants, maintain the plants, grow the trees, and so on. They look at energy conservation, so they've done a lot of work on, for example, rainwater harvesting, as well as energy conservation. And they're also looking at different kinds of techniques which help with soil development and agriculture. So you've got vermiculture and so, etc. And they also look at developing water and soil and better ways of using natural resources. They were able to withstand the drought for about 3 years because they built these huge aquifers and they use rainwater harvesting. They also use all of their waste, all of their human waste and all of their vegetable waste they use in the small plot that they use around this area. So up here, this is their kitchen and this is their solar cooker. And what they've also done is they've worked with a German company and they have solar cookers. And all the girls who go to the project take with them when they leave, they take them with a solar cooker that they take to their village. And then the girls teach the village how to use a solar cooker. So in India, a lot of the time, people are going to find wood for fuel, and then they use a lot of ghee or oil in terms of their cooking. So using the solar cookers, they manage to use less oil in the cooking, and they don't have to use so much wood in terms of so you have less carbon emissions and so on. So it's a fantastic sustainable project. And here you have solar drying of vegetables. So you use these very low energy solar dryers, and they use all of the excess vegetables that they aren't using for cooking, and it means that they have food sustainability during the rest of the year, and also they sell them, so it's part of their products that they use. So here are some of the areas in which they have training and projects. So there's quite a few, as you can see, that are to do with fabric making, tailoring, and so on. Then you have some which is things like word processing and typing and IT skills. And then you have other stuff to do with other kind of entrepreneurial skills. What is interesting about the typing is that they have some students from the local university who come and do a baseline assessment. And they take the girls and they do a baseline assessment when they start the project. And it's the girls who then teach the students how to do typing in Hindi, because the university students can only do typing in English. So it's a really fantastic thing that the university students who are doing the psychological profiling of the girls are actually taught by the girls a new skill. And one of the great things is that this project takes the most disadvantaged kids in the area. So, first of all, they're girls. Secondly, they're girls who left school. Thirdly, they're young girls. Then they also are rural girls, not urban, and then they're from the Dalit population, which is the untouchables, which is a disadvantaged population. So you can't get a more disadvantaged group than these girls. And they have these 6 months projects, and it's really well integrated into the community, and it really uses peer mentoring and various other really excellent practices. So it's a really brilliant practice. So this here is a photo. I think with the lighting you can't really see the pictures very well, but this is a picture of the IT work that the girls are doing. There's some other wonderful pictures on their website of their batik and all that other kind of stuff. Okay, so we're going to look back now at some of the statistics from the European Bank. And what they do is they try to foster entrepreneurship, and so they donate funds, but as well as donating funds, they give business assistance. So there's it's a small business support system, which is a project that they have, which tries to develop, obviously, small businesses. They work with micro businesses and they work with SMEs in order to try to help develop women entrepreneurs. And so here are some of the areas in which they are working. So, as I said earlier on, they give money, but they also give business expertise. Now, one of the things, we said earlier on about special projects, financial services that you can give to women. One of the things that we could think about, so for example, it's applicable to maybe the Welsh Government, is this idea of a higher point system. So in other words, if you have an organisation which has to procure, you might have a certain type of system which you use in order to decide which vendors you're going to procure from. So in the point system, what you can do is ensure that those organisations which have gender balance, that are working with women entrepreneurs, that are doing other kinds of work that you think is excellent, that can be part of the point system in order to decide which organisations you buy from. And if you do that, what happens is that you are then making it better, it's better for the organisation. It's in their best interest to have these better practices, because then they're going to be more likely to win the tender. So if we look here, we can see the kind of areas that the ERBD has found works really well. So one of the things is promoting women's entrepreneurship. The other is helping companies who support gender equality and so on. So you also look at helping support structures so that you have better work-life balance. Now, what is interesting is you can see that here are some of the things that we've already discussed today. So, for example, if you look at the bottom, we can see that these are areas which the bank has found across the world have been useful: mentoring, networking, and also business matching. Of course, they do these other areas as well. So you have projects, you have training. We talked about training and education earlier on today. The need to access finance. What is interesting about visibility and dissemination is that is something we've also spoken about. We need to be writing our own stories, and we need to be disseminating good practice. I mean, one of the things that was interesting earlier on that was discussed is that that there is I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called the DIY expert list. Has anybody heard of that? Well, what was interesting. There was a program recently on the radio, and it was about breast cancer. And the interviewer was male, and the two experts he had were male. And one of the questions he asked, the interviewer asked one of the experts was, "And what do you think a woman would think about this?" So somebody wrote in and said, "Well, why didn't you have any women?" And they said, "Well, there weren't any women experts." So there's this sort of a DIY effort to make sure that there are women experts. So you can go to the website and you can look it up, and you can put your name down, or you can put somebody else's name down as an expert, because we have to be writing our own stories. We have to be visible. Okay, so SBS is a small business support campaign. So here we are, they're looking at mentoring. So one of the things that is very important about mentoring is the need to share best practice with each other. But we've heard a lot about mentoring already, so I don't need to go into that. And then the other area is networking. Now, women are really good at networking, but we need to be better. One of the things that we've done in Stroud, which is where I live, is we've set up something called the Stroud Business Women's Network. What we found as women in business was that there were many business networking opportunities that were quite masculine. So you had to go there and you had to kind of sell yourself. "I'm so brilliant, rah, rah, rah." Well, actually what you wanted to do was you wanted to say, "Well, I'm really good at what I do, but actually I don't know what price I should be selling myself at," or "I don't know what to do about such and such and such." And when you went to a very male-orientated business place, you didn't get that kind of support, because you had to be kind of selling yourself all the time, and that's not what you wanted to do. So we set up a different kind of business network, and that's what we have now in Stroud. And when we started it, there was about 12 people coming. And now, every month, there's at least 40 or 50 who gather every month, and there's a massive mailing list of people who are on the list, because it provides the needs for women entrepreneurs. So when we're talking about networking, we need to come up with the networking institutions that women want and women need. And then the last area is about business matching. And the importance of business matching is looking at relationships that work, so export, import, or different ways that businesses can help each other. So what are the results of this small business support project? Well, here are some of the numbers. And these are the areas that have been used. So what is interesting is that what they wanted to achieve was they wanted to improve management effectiveness, market performance, reduce costs, and improve environmental management. And here, these are the types of advice that women were given that they found useful. So again, you can see it's about planning, about organisation, restructuring, cost effectiveness, IT systems, quality control, and that kind of thing. So these are some of the areas that the women entrepreneurs found useful. And this is the experience from around the world that I'm sure would be useful also here in Wales. And then here, the last statistic is the kind of success rate that there's been. So you had 75% of companies were able to expand or increase their profit, and 25% had increase in financing availability. And these are the areas in which it was active. So here's some World Bank findings. This is a really fantastic report. Really, I encourage you to go to the World Bank site and have a look at this report. It's a really excellent report. And these were, how can you take this really massive report and then, break it down into a few key areas? But these are maybe the key areas. And it's interesting to see how they refer to what we've spoken about today. So what they looked at is, again, this idea that you've got to have an infrastructure. So whether it's transport, or whether it's media, or whatever a country requires, you have to have an infrastructure that allows women to have access to market goods and services. It's very important to work with young women. We've heard about that already. One of the panelists said, get people young. You've got to work with young women. Education is very important. And then intersection. Intersection is the interrelationship between policy, working at policy level, and working at a training level, and working at grassroots level, working with civil society activists, working with policymakers. So intersection is really important. So just going very briefly through some quotes that were taken from this report, and some key ideas I've highlighted in green. So what is interesting is what happens inside the home often limits the ability women have outside the home. Where was it? It was in Ennis. I was in Ireland last week, and I was talking to a woman. This is the west of Ireland, so this is in Ennis, and she was saying there were some projects about women capacity building, and there was this one woman who was always late to these seminars. And they wanted to find out why this woman was always late. And she said because every day when she had to go to this seminar, her husband wanted a full breakfast. So she had to cook his full breakfast. And because she had to cook his full breakfast, she was late. Now, he didn't ask for a full breakfast on the days when she didn't have the course. On the days she had the course, he wanted a full breakfast. Well, you have to question, well, why did she cook in the blasted breakfast anyway? But that's another question. The point is she felt she had to, and that prevented her. So this idea that the equality within the home affects equality outside the home applies everywhere. It's not just, in the third world or in the south. Okay, so the other thing is we have this unequal access to land and credit and so on. It significantly, and also access to new production technologies. It's very interesting that in those areas which are particularly feminized, like, for example, cloth manufacturing, they haven't received the same level of development that other organizations, that other areas have developed. So that's a significant finding. And also, this is a very interesting finding from the World Bank, that increasing gender equality has a significant impact on the aggregate economic performance of a country. It's something that the World Bank recognizes, it's something that is a reality, and it's something that we need to really ensure that policymakers realize. And of course, this last point is that although there are huge long-term benefits to enable women as entrepreneurs and to be economically active, there are short-term costs. So we have to realize that we have to invest. But like anything, investment is important. So this is another example of good practice. It's called the Junior Entrepreneurship Scheme. It's running in Ghana and Tanzania. I'm having to zoom on because of time. It teaches entrepreneurial skills, but the way that it runs itself is also a social enterprise, and it concentrates on young women. So this is this booklet. It's this booklet that's got like cartoons in it, and it teaches business skills. It also enables the young people who are involved to be able to develop a business as a result of going on the training. So these are some of the examples from the Women for a Common Future. For the Rio Plus 20 conference, they had a set of awards for the best examples of women's entrepreneurship that was also sustainably development. And these are some of them. So here is one of them. It's an interesting title, the Ghanaian Association for Women's Burden Alleviation. And it started off by being a kind of a playground idea. So you work together in the field practically, and as a result of that, you'll learn together. And what is interesting is the finding is that the women learned so much better techniques for farming that they were able to save time. They were able to save their labor time, and as a result of that, they were able to have more time for education and so on. There was a program on the BBC recently. It was about the Indian Ocean. Did anybody see that? It was very interesting. There was one particular bit. The guy was looking at North Kenya on the coast, and because of the Sudanese pirates, a lot of the men had not been able to continue going fishing. So the women were developing their own businesses. And what they'd done is that they went beach combing and looking for plastic, because the Indian Ocean brings up a lot of rubbish onto the beaches. So they didn't look for any old plastic, they looked for flip-flops. And they collected the flip-flops, and they've made out of the flip-flops artworks, toys, and these are commissioned by companies in the US and in the UK, and they are supporting the community. And when the woman was asked, what is the benefit of this project? She said, we didn't all have houses before, now we have houses. The children didn't go to school before, now they all go to school. So what is interesting, and what we find around the world, is that when you empower women, they change the community, which is not necessarily the case for men, unfortunately. So here is another one, which is the All India Women's Conference Solar Panel Mechanics. There's also another project which is called the Barefoot Engineers. You can find stuff on YouTube about these. I really recommend you to do that. Basically, it's highlighting solar-powered things like lanterns and cookers and stuff, then advertising those, and then enabling women to be the engineers and the mechanics for that. The barefoot engineers was really interesting because these women who were completely uneducated, had no engineering skills or anything, hadn't even gone past basic school level, were taken off. They had a 6-month project. They were taught how to build and install solar panels. They went off and they did it in an engineering school, and all the professors and so forth were astonished that these really rural, illiterate women were able to build these solar panels when the chaps couldn't do it themselves. So there's some fantastic projects around. Goldman Sachs has this 10,000 Women project. What they've recognized as an international organization is that if you can empower women entrepreneurs, you can change the world, you can change communities. And so therefore what they've done is they've tried to look at the things that the women entrepreneurs need, which is the same things we've already found out. They need business plans, they need business assistance, they need access to financing, they need help with business plans, they need mentoring and support. And if you give them, there's huge development. So there's just a few stories. You can go onto the website and you can look at the YouTube, look at the videos of these women themselves. So this lady is from Brazil. Basically, she had a garden tool company. She's now built it to be construction tools. She manufactures these. And what she's done is you can see that she's had an increase of her business by 33%. So this is a lady from Kenya. And she's got a transport company. And as a result of her transport company, she has been able to expand by 90%. And she's expanded. She's diversified her business. And then this lady is from Nigeria. She has an IT company. And what she's done is she's merged with another software company. And if you look at hers, she has had an increase in value of her company she's had an increase in profit of 200%, and she's expanded. So these are just some examples of how women can develop their abilities and their businesses given the right resources. So here again are some last-minute findings from the ERBD. Basically, there are demands and challenges, and the idea is that, especially in post-conflict countries, you find that, and in the economic downturn as well, you find that there's a real need for women's entrepreneurship support, and yet governments say they can't afford to do it. But it's short-termism, because if you really want to change society, that's what you need to do. It's very interesting. When I was in Iraq in 2004, I met with the head of DFID. And he said, women, the budget for women is only 1 million. It's nothing. And this was offered by, Patricia Hewitt. Okay, she'd given away $1 million of the government's money, much to their annoyance. So she promised this to the women. And he said, my budget is billions for, big planning projects, water schemes, etc. What is women? Unfortunately, of course, what happened is all the insurgents blew up all of the, water plants and all of these massive billion projects. If they just spent a little bit of that money on the women, maybe the women would have taught their sons not to blow up the flipping water projects. So these are the kind of the necessities that are required. These are the questions to leave us thinking with. I'm sorry there's not a brilliant slide with lots of pretty pictures. But basically, one of the things that we really learn is that in terms of economic development, we know that we have to have development of women in order to have economic viability of any country in any region. So if you really want to see economic development for a country, social and economic development, we need to empower women entrepreneurs. Because what they do is they put back into the community in a much more significant way than their male counterparts. And yet, they are very able, but they are prevented from achieving their ability because of the current status quo. So the other question we need to think about ourselves, I think, is what are we really asking? Do we want to just have more people coming into the dominant economic status quo? Or do we want to rethink that economic situation? Do we want to have a society which continues to encourage competitiveness? There was an interesting conference in the European Parliament a couple of years ago, and Siemens gave a talk. Now, Siemens had this huge fraud thing in 2007, and they had to rewrite everything, all of their processes about how they functioned as an organisation. And what they found is once they became more ethical and they had ethical practice in place, their productivity went up by 33%. And there's a book that Richard Branson wrote last year, which again is saying the same thing, that companies and organisations who try to do good, who try to do well, do better. And it's something that we women know, because if you look at women entrepreneurs, what do they want to do? They want to be more independent. They want to do things their way. They don't want to just, get into the rubbishy politics of, the large corporations. Why is it that a lot of women who go high up in corporations come out of those senior jobs? Because they don't like all of that rubbish politicking. They don't like that competitiveness. But what we have to realize is we don't have to have it. We can choose to create an alternative economic situation. And one of the things that I feel very passionately about is over the years, we have spoken as a women's movement about getting women into the dominant social structures. I say change the social structures. It's not just about getting women into 9-to-5 jobs or into the current political system. Why don't we just change it? We need to revolutionize the current system. We need to change it so that it fits much better towards women, because women are the majority of the population in the world. So these are just some kind of thoughts. One of the interesting things is that our economy, the way we use our money, says things about what we believe about ourselves. So in the United Nations at the Commission on the Status of Women a few years ago, one of the subjects was gender budgeting, because how governments spend their money and think about their money says something about society. Why is it that all the UNCTAD agreements, which is the United Nations trade agreements, are gender neutral? Why is it they never consider that some of their trade agreements have a different impact upon the women than upon the men? And yet they do hugely. When you look at these in these particular commercial zones, which are free of the proper ILO, for example, International Labour Organization arrangements and so on. They're supposed to have bring in internal investment into third world countries, into developing countries, into countries of the South. What happens is you get rid of all of those benefits. And who suffers? It's the women. It's the vulnerable. So when we're looking at trade agreements, we are gender blind about them. We shouldn't be. We should be recognizing that the way we spend our money, the way we use our money says something about our society. And what we need to do is make sure that the way we use our money recognizes equality. And one of the very last things I want to talk about is let us try to achieve these three things: collective prosperity, community well-being, and environmental sustainability. Now, it's interesting. I think we should have kite marks for all of these three things. We do have it for environmental sustainability. We have sort of organic and the Soil Association and things like that. And we do have a bit about collective prosperity because we have fair trade and so on. We don't yet have a kite mark or some understanding about community well-being. Imagine if you went to buy your coffee and you read there was a label and you knew that that coffee product was like this flip-flop product, was putting shoes on the kids, or enabling them to have roofs on their houses, or enabling a school to be built, or something, or was enabling a cooperative to be developed. Wouldn't we want to buy that coffee than another kind of coffee which was developing competition, was breaking down families, which was getting one family to war with another family, etc.? So these are the areas I think that we should really be looking at. So although we've had all of that research about what we've learned around the world that is important if we really want to help women to find their place in society, to really have their role in the world that they should have, what we also need to be thinking is, let us change the current social order to one that is better and the one that will help us work for collective prosperity, community well-being and environmental sustainability. And thank you very much, and I'm sorry it was such a rush.
Well, Zarin, that was, I think, just quite inspirational. Thank you very much. You sure there's no one who wants to take the advantage now? Yeah, we have some.
Dwi'n meddwl bod yn hynod o ddiddorol y ffordd maen nhw yn siarad am y cynlluniau yma sydd yn digwydd lle mae y merched yn datblygu busnesu eu hunain. Achos dwi'n cytuno 100% mae y dyfodol mewn gwirionedd ar gyfer merched yn enwedig mewn gwlad fel Cymru yw i tynnu ffwrdd o'r strwytherau sydd wedi bodoli'r blynyddoedd maith a creu sefydliadau yn hunain. Mae dyfodol Cymru yn dibynnu ar cwmnïau bach a canolig i maint beth sy'n gweithio gyda nhw am flynyddoedd maith. Ac dyma'r unig strwythyr sydd wirioneddol yn gallu helpu ferched ddatblygu i'w llawn potensial. Dwi'n gweithio ar gynllun gyda'r cynulliad o'r enw Dynamo, a dyn ni'n mynd mewn i ysgolion gyda blwyddyn 9 i hybu mentorgarwch ymysg nid yn unig bechgyn ond hefyd gyda merched. A dwi'n meddwl mae hyn yn un o'r cynlluniau mae'r cynulliad wedi bod yn ei wneud yn iawn a llongyfarchiadau i'r cynulliad am wneud rhywbeth sydd yn hybu mentorgarwch ymysg pobl ifanc, achos dwi'n meddwl mai hwn yw y dyfodol i ferched i greu busnesu nhw eu hunain ac i creu y strwythyr sydd yn wedi weithio o gwmpas y gofynion personol sydd yn eu bywyd nhw.
Yes, I mean, it does seem to be that micro businesses and SMEs, I think it was the World Health Organization that had a statistic that the majority of people are employed by small businesses and the majority of business owners are women. So what is interesting is that the organisations that employ the largest groups of people in one particular organisation seem to be owned by men, but around the world most people are employed by women, if you look at that World Health Organisation statistic, but they're within the SME area. Yeah, I think it's absolutely the case that the best way forward for any society is to develop its micro business and its SMEs. And I think we don't look enough in the UK at micros, which is 1 to 5 participants, which is actually the majority of women have 1 to 5 employees.
I just wanted to flag up really a lot of what you were saying about women and sustainability, and that's, that is an issue that I certainly have been concerned about, that not enough women are talking about sustainable development and being involved in the decisions around sustainable development. The Assembly has a commitment to sustainable development and its documents One Wales, One Planet, but also the Sustainable Development Bill will be out for consultation in the new year, and it would be really good if women responded to that consultation really, and the better, because not enough women are engaged with this, and without women you'll never achieve a sustainable Wales really. Thank you.
What is really interesting is that there are so many projects which do both. You don't have to have an economically viable project which is not environmentally viable. And what the Women for a Common Future have found is that there are masses of projects which are brilliant for the environment, but at the same time are brilliant for women's economic development as well. And I think that, projects like the Youth Entrepreneurship one and the Bali Institute and so on, they also show that you can have holistic, coherent projects. And in fact, the holistic projects are the ones that can be the most beneficial to the community, the most benefit to the environment, and the most benefit to women and their families. So yes, there are ways of doing things, and maybe we just have to be much more creative.
Just a very quick question. My name is Melinda Thomas. I noticed, Zarin, in your conclusion, you stated that research has shown that business women put more back into the community than their male counterparts, which I think is a wonderful statistic to have at your fingertips. Just could you tell me what the source is for that research?
In the World Bank.
Thank you.
We have actually got some Welsh-based research on that as well, in terms of equal pay in Neath Port Talbot, and how giving women back pay through the equal pay settlements has put more money back into local communities. I just take the opportunity, thank you very much, Zarin, and welcome and inspiring as always. You mentioned right at the end there gender budgeting, and how a country spends its money can tell you more about that country than anything else. And I know that we heard from Jane this morning, Jane Hutt, the Finance Minister, who's done a lot of work on equality impact assessments and trying to build equality into the budget statements for Wales. Have you got any international good practice examples, or where countries have built positive, proactive, gender-advancing budgets as opposed to analysing retrospectively spend already made?
Well, I'm sure there are. I just don't know them. I guess my anecdotal response would be for example, from the Commission on the Status of Women, is that states parties, nation states, countries, always give fantastic statements, and they talk about it really well. the implementation seems to be lacking. So, for example, in this country, we have the gender equality policy, which was put into place, and then that was superseded by the Equalities Act, which now the government is not enforcing, has chosen not to enforce some of its aspects. And yet, I had to do some research for the Community Development Foundation when we were still looking at the gender equality duty, and found that a lot of statutory bodies and a lot of businesses were not putting it into practice. In fact, what they were doing is that they were employing gender consultants to see whether they could get away with not putting into practice the gender equality component. And because the single equalities body, the Equality and, what is it called, and Human Rights Council, did not have enough clause in terms of what we heard earlier on by our media colleague, was not strong enough, and there were no sanctions. People just weren't taking it seriously. So you can have really good policy, like the Equalities Act or like the gender equality duty, but if it's not implemented, if there's not the political will, then you don't see change. And actually, it maybe isn't just about political will, because one of the questions earlier on was about quotas and all of that kind of stuff. There's this woman called, not Dibjani, I can't remember, her second name is Jane, and she's done this research about the United Nations, and she was saying that for many, many years, all the women's activists were talking about having 30%, to having critical mass, that if you got a certain amount of critical mass of women in particular places, you'd see change. And what has been found is it's not a question of critical mass. It's actually a question of engendered people. So it's not what sex you are that's important, it's whether or not you understand about equality. So you can have some women in power who really, pull up the ladder behind them, or don't help with having gender equality policies. And you can have some men who are fantastic champions of equality. So it's not the sex that's important, it's the engendered nature of the individuals that are important. So what I think is important is we need to have more training. This thing we had earlier on about mentoring of men is a really fantastic idea, because what we need more people in the executive who are interested in equality and who understand in their gut this thing that we all know, which is that if you have empowerment of women, you will have a huge empowerment of society. It's not a right, it's a truth. It's a necessity, it's a reality, it's an essential, it's absolutely vital to human development that we have equality. It's not a women's issue. And if you have that, then you would find everything else falls into place. You'd have proper legislation, it would have robust sanctions, and you would see it implemented.
I think that's absolutely the right note to end on, that it's not just a women's issue. Zarin, that was quite remarkable. Thank you so much. It's been really enlightening. So I'm sure you all give a big round of applause.
Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru yw'r corff sy'n cael ei ethol yn ddemocrataidd i gynrychioli buddiannau Cymru a'i phobl, i ddeddfu ar gyfer Cymru ac i ddwyn Llywodraeth Cymru i gyfrif. I gael rhagor o wybodaeth ac i ganfod pwy sydd yn eich cynrychioli, ewch i cynulliadcymru.org neu gallwch chi'n dilyn ar Facebook a Twitter.